This panel will be moderated by Ms. Catrin, Associate Partner, Lufthansa Consulting. We are joined by a very able 4 panelists from our airlines, Ms. Yvonne Makolo, Chief Executive Officer, RwandAir, and on behalf of Mr. Busera Awel, who could not join us today, we'll be joined by Mr. Henok from ET, who is in charge of international affairs and commercial agreements. And then we'll also be joined by Mr. Allan Kilavuka, Chief Executive Officer, Kenya Airways, and Mr. Sanjeev Gadhia, CEO, Astral Aviation. Catrin, you have the floor to start your session.
A warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. I would like to start with a short presentation into the topic, effective collaborative strategies for recovery and sustainability, followed by an interesting question and answer session with the panelists, and at the end we will answer your questions, which will be the chat function from you. 2 I already received via the app, so I tried to speed it up a little bit to catch up time. Let me start with the, I mean, we all know what the COVID-19 impact is, but generally global hotspots of COVID-19 have been shifting from Asia to Europe to the American continent, while Africa was and is reporting the lowest figures. You can see 1.8 million cases in comparison to the rest of the world, which is 1.8 million too much, but still a very low number in comparison. And Africa had long lockdown times, and the airlines have used the time to set, not only the airlines, also the airports and government, to set this framework to start flying to the world, but is hit again by the second wave of COVID-19, which we see unfortunately now in the rest of the world. Let's have a look into the aviation environment, which airlines and airports are acting in now. Airlines and airports need to satisfy both passengers and governments to remain attractive and to be allowed to operate, whereas the government defines the overarching framework. A tight cooperation has been and is between the different stakeholders essential, especially a tight communication to align all parties' requirements. Let's have a closer look into the airline cooperation. Despite the unprecedented nature of crisis, airlines are keen to offer the best possible connectivity for their customers, ideally operating a network as similar as possible to that pre-crisis. On the other hand, there's intense competition among airlines for the diminishing customer pool, resulting in a need for very measured reinstatement of capacity. So we have we have good working partnership models like interline, codeshare, global lines, equity partner, joint venture, merger, acquisition. But to intensify the cooperation within this spectrum is a requirement. Next slide, please. We see 3 types of partnerships are to be expected. One is the cooperation between airlines in a competitive domestic space. As an example, we saw Azul and LATAM in the last months in Brazil, historically fierce competitors, but the initial codeshare on 64 domestic routes, of which 2/3 only served by one player, significantly increasing the reach of the network. And a joint venture, even merger, was floated. A second partnership we see developing is the international cooperation between regional and or domestic carriers. Even before COVID-19, we saw the tight cooperation of Ethiopian Airlines and Sky or their other equity shares they're having, in which Ethiopian not only became a shareholder, but a strategic and technical partner for the first years. On the other hand, the West Africa benefited from increasing connectivity. To give you a COVID-19 example of the international market, American Airlines and JetBlue entered a strategic partnership, given both presence in Boston and New York. American Airlines will enhance also its domestic penetration because JetBlue gained access to large international network on the other hand. Reciprocally, loyalty benefits and promises of a seamless experience for customers is given. The third partnership model we see is the cooperation between international carriers, because especially the international long-distance market was hit particularly hard. And a good example we go see on the international market is Malaysian Airlines and Japan Airlines, who launched extensive joint business partnership. And what they are doing explicitly also is jointly driving discussions with government to ensure high safety standards between the countries of both. Next slide, please. Let me give you some international partnership examples which can enable partners to address current challenges more powerful. One is alliances, where we know the partnerships of African carriers with the major alliances exist. I come later to that. Then joint ventures work well. I give you the example of Singapore Airlines and Air New Zealand. Another one is the equity partnership. I already mentioned the existing one between Ethiopian and 3 African carriers, but also the tight international example of Delta and Virgin. And partnerships in Africa as such, I already said we have the examples of Egypt Air, RwandAir Maroc, or Ethiopian or South African being part of an alliance. We have also the discussions on equity share of Qatar and RwandAir, or we have the cooperation of Kenya Airways with Air France KLM and their joint venture. The only recent one during COVID-19 times is the Ethiopian Airlines example, where pilots and aircraft have been offered because SAA is suffering. So what new approaches are emerging in light of COVID-19? This I would like to discuss and exchange with my panelists. So let me, let's say ladies first. Yvonne, the first question for you is in regards to when we go back to the examples I have shown of partnership. Let me start with the equity partnership model. You stated in an article on March 10th, you described Qatar Airways' proposal to acquire a 49% stake in RwandAir as a win-win situation. You commented the African market is untapped. Some areas are really underserved. So for us, partnership with Qatar Airways is a really good idea. We know it's not the contract is not signed yet, but what do you expect from this cooperation with Qatar Airways once the contract is signed?
Thank you, Catrin. As you mentioned, the negotiations are still ongoing. We hope to conclude soon. But I still stand by my statement that it's a win-win situation. For RwandAir partnering with a world-class airline like Qatar, we can only benefit from that in terms of knowledge sharing, having a partner who can assist with negotiations as well. In terms of on the commercial side as well, in terms of broadening our network. And for them, as I mentioned, Africa is an underserved market with a lot of growth potential. So for Qatar as well, they do see value in investing in an African airline. So it is a win-win situation, especially in light of the recent the ongoing pandemic. Although we've had to resize our airline, like most other airlines, with the lockdown, our network shrinking and now developing again. once we reset and are ready to grow again, it's a great opportunity to partner with an airline like Qatar. So it's an exciting collaboration that we're all looking forward to.
Talking about your joint venture with Air France and KLM, was or is your joint venture with them supporting Kenya Airways restart of operation COVID-19 times?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me for this presentation. So to talk about the joint venture that we have with Air France KLM, it's an old joint venture, been there for a couple of years now. When there was a cessation of movement, of air traffic movement earlier this year, obviously it played no role because there was no traffic. And so it did not play any role in that regard. And during the initial periods of when we restarted in August, after COVID, some of the restrictions had been lifted. The focus was on rebuilding the networks almost from scratch and trying to build the traffic. And this, we were doing this in collaboration with our government and also the airports, also in conformity with the strict direction of the protocols. So it was therefore not easy to have this coordination between ourselves and our JV partners, that is Air France and KLM. And so we did this on our own, and so did they. So today we have suspended this cooperation, mutually agreed that we suspend this JV for a period of time to enable us to continue monitoring traffic and to wait for a better schedule integrity between airlines and also within the airline. And then, of course, this affected us severely because, as you would imagine, there is always a wave, and then there is a change in tactic in different countries, particularly in Europe. So it's very difficult to predict schedules, and therefore it's not easy for us to continue doing the cooperation on the trunk routes of Nairobi and Europe. However, we continue to look forward to cooperation because this joint venture relationship is important for us to provide connectivity beyond our network and beyond the hubs that we have. So it's critical for us, and we believe that this is something that we need to do going forward. For now, it is a little bit difficult because of schedule integrities, but it will deliver very good results once we have a bit more clarity.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Sanjeev, representing the only cargo airline on the panel. Astral Aviation signed 2015 a strategic cooperation agreement with UK's Network Aviation Group to aid the group's expansion in the African market. Sanjeev, C-19 brought the majority of airlines into crisis mode, while it is for cargo airlines a chance for bigger business. Can you share with us your business development since and which partnerships supported you here?
Thank you, Catrin, and warm greetings to everybody from Kenya. It's really great to see my fellow colleagues, Yvonne and Allan from RwandAir and Kenya Airways. And again, Catrin, we've actually seen some fantastic growth in the cargo volumes during the pandemic, which has resulted in an increase in our fleet and in our scheduled network. And during this period of time, we've had a number of partnerships. You mentioned the partnership in Network Airline Services, with whom we have a joint venture for our 2 747 freighters, which we fly from Nairobi to the UK and into Europe 5 times a week. But during this period of the pandemic, we've had a number of really good opportunities, which we've had, the largest being with the World Food Programme and WHO. And they've entrusted us to move PPEs, testing kits, and ventilators from China and Europe to our Nairobi hub. And this was a very large operation which is ongoing. We've been redistributing a lot of this cargo to various countries in Africa, including Yemen. And to date, we've moved about 600 tons of cargo. But I think the biggest partnership we've actually had during the pandemic was with DHL. And DHL relied on us to perform flights for them from our Nairobi hub to Johannesburg, Lusaka, Maputo, and Mauritius. And initially we started with about 3 flights per week, and this increased to 7 flights per week. And it's been really great because we've done over 180 flights during this whole period of the pandemic, and we hope to continue for the next couple of months. We've also done a number of flights for the African Medical Platform, which is supported by the Africa CDC. And in this project, we've actually transported PPEs and testing kits to over 42 countries in Africa. But one thing I really need to also mention is the support that we have with Kenya Airways. This morning, we chartered a 787 Kenya Airways to fly to Guangzhou. And this aircraft will be coming back with PPEs and testing kits for South Sudan. So the last 6 months really has been great. I just have no complaints, and it's been great in terms of partnerships and also in terms of relationships.
Thank you very much. That sounds very promising. Hope for everybody the business is picking up, and good to hear that there's a tight cooperation with Kenya Airways on this one. Allan, to you, showing the various possibilities of partnerships and what new approaches are emerging in light of COVID-19 from your perspective. I mean, one we just heard from Sanjeev, which is very good to hear. Any more?
Yeah, Catrin, thank you. Yeah, so a few of them, I imagine, but the first one is first one and the immediate one is really how do we preserve our cash. Cash preservation is important, and so what we are going to do is continue pushing for ways of driving down costs, so that we can increase efficiencies. And in that way, of course, really continue looking at our network, be very nimble about it, be very pragmatic about the network, and to see if we can, we can make the network more efficient. And then in that way, as we drive towards more cost efficiencies by looking at network and being very pragmatic about it, network by network, fleet, people, then we also look at how do we develop interesting ways of fundraising, very innovative ways of fundraising. So not your typical, normal debt, equity kind of thing. Really look for interesting, very innovative ways, and that I think many airlines are working on. We are doing that as well, so that we can raise funding in addition to just cash conservation. So those are two. One which is key and critical is just making sure that you have a culture of innovation across the organization. For example, you had Sanjeev talking about the flight that we're doing to China. So this is typically, of course, a passenger aircraft. One of the very few fast airlines to convert the Dreamliner into a freighter that will help, carry a lot of cargo back and forth. But even longer term initiatives, particularly those around digitalization. We talk about even another very interesting one on new partnerships and new markets, kind of looking at, less scheduled operations and more charters, being very flexible and responding to what the customer is looking for. So looking at the value that you're going to provide to the customer, so that you're responsive to them, because they are now very specific. Now customers, we were trying to encourage them to fly by offering flexibility, for example, when it comes to refunds and so on. And as you know, this industry is very rigid in the way we operate. So now we need to be a little bit more a lot more flexible. And not just that, really thinking about, so what is the next for the customer? Because customer is now, they're more interested in point-to-point destinations. They want to reduce their connections, just to reduce the health risks of connecting in airports. So all those things, and therefore really continuously looking at your network and how you can flex. Those are the things that I think are going to put us in good stead going forward. But the important thing is pragmatism and agility to respond to these new trends that we're seeing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very, very good examples. Could you give one example? You said in finding interesting ways for fundraising. Is there one example you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, so the combining partnerships. So if you have two airlines that will provide better proposition to a someone who's providing funding as opposed to one. So, for example, if Yvonne would be interested to talk to us, and then we approach a financer to fund both the two organizations as an entity in some sort of a partnership, it would be more attractive to the financer than me going alone or Yvonne going alone. So those are some of the interesting ones that you think about. And also just how do you get them to participate? In what kind of structure should these financiers participate in helping to raise funding for you, as opposed to just basically giving you debt equity or that kind of thing. So this is one example.
Excellent, thank you. Yvonne, do you believe that equity partnerships like the one Ethiopian has with other African airlines are a model for the African market to make airlines survive and improve connectivity?
Well, I believe that's one way to go, especially if it's beneficial for both parties. If both parties are getting substantial benefit from the partnership, I think it will be more difficult going forward, especially in light of COVID-19, as most airlines are impacted, whether they're the big airlines or the small airlines. It'll be more difficult to use the equity investment models. But if there are airlines who are open to that, I believe so, and it really fast tracks, especially for smaller airlines or countries which want to start their own national carrier for whatever reason. It's a good way to jumpstart the setup of that airline, and having a strong equity partner who's able to give whether it's technical support or financial or from the knowledge perspective, it's a great way to really the airline and help the airlines to survive. So it's an interesting model, but we'll see how it goes in light of our current situation. And
yes.
I just wanted to add on to the question you raised on the new approaches. I think Allan covered it very well in terms of cost cutting and more innovative ways of raising cash and flexibility in route development. But I also wanted to mention that especially now in the short term, what we're seeing a lot more of in terms of new approaches of collaboration is beyond the normal alliances, airline alliances. We're seeing more collaboration between airlines, airports, tourism boards, governments, especially in light of having the right protocols in place to make travel more comfortable and give people confidence to travel. So a very strong collaboration between airlines, airports, and governments, especially the ministries of health, to put those protocols in place to jumpstart the industry. And I think a lot more needs to be done on that front, especially on the government side, in terms of harmonizing all the protocols in order to avoid the 14-day quarantine, having proper testing mechanisms in place in all countries. If we can harmonize all that, then it would also remove the need for air bubbles as well, because it's a very short-term solution. We need that across the board in order to jumpstart our businesses. And same thing, the collaboration with tourism boards to stimulate travel and get people visiting different parts of the world, especially within between the different tourism boards of the countries, to get travel within the the continent going, especially from a tourism perspective, given what's happening in Europe and elsewhere. We need more Africans traveling within the continent as tourists. So those are some of the new approaches that we'll see going forward.
Thank you very much for adding. Excellent. To summarize it for everybody in the audience, I would like to hear from every one of you one recommendation on which you believe is the best collaborative strategy for recovery, something other airlines should start studying in more detail. So what would be your recommendation? Sanjeev, would you like to start?
Sure, Catrin. I'm a firm believer that that airlines need to do a little bit more towards treating cargo as a part of the core business. And this is something I would like to mention very honestly to my fellow colleagues who are the CEOs of all the African airlines, is that please make sure that you take cargo seriously. Please give it a priority in strategy, give it a priority in fleet planning, network development. But the most important thing is to make sure that cargo is represented at the board. This is something that has not happened in many airlines, and we always see boards which are being occupied by colleagues who are in the passenger business. But I really believe that the entire role that cargo played during the pandemic is a wake-up call. And I really believe that cargo has to play a very important part for the next 1 to 3 years. And every airline, whether it's in Africa or beyond Africa, has to make sure that the view of the cargo team has to be incorporated in every aspect. And I really believe that that is very important. I'm also of the opinion that during the pandemic, there was very little signs of collaboration. And I really believe this is something which is needed. We need to collaborate more during the pandemic, because that's a time when you need to be in the company of your partners. And I've just recently taken on the position of the chairman of the regional network and the cargo committee of AFRA. And one of the things we are trying to do is to actually enhance the cooperation between the member airlines. And one of the things we are doing is we are sharing our network data so that we can actually now look at the measures of how we can consolidate and harmonize our respective networks. So we've really got some exciting plans ahead in some of the cargo committees and the regional network committees, and we'll really see a situation where African airlines will start collaborating more with each other, especially during the next 1 to 2 years. And this is really something that we believe it's going to work.
I'd like to share with us your one recommendation which is worth to have a look into for sustainable traffic development and connectivity.
Sure. I actually had two, but Allan already mentioned one. I thought of the joint procurement.
Yes.
How to joint procurement. You mentioned about approaching financiers jointly, which is a fantastic idea. Another one, which again I've discussed we've discussed a lot with Allan, is also the collaboration in terms of routes. How we can collaborate on some of our routes, especially the thinner routes, because in light of COVID, we've had to shrink our network and gotten rid of some of our thinner routes, which again puts the continent in a difficult position. It was already underserved. The situation is made a lot worse. So to see how airlines can partner together on some of these routes in order to share the risks and the benefits if successful. So I think that's something that maybe to be looked at more closely by airlines.
Thank you very much. And now, Allan, you have the chance to add one more.
Yeah, that's a disadvantage of talking last, right? Because they have said the two things I wanted to say. But what I wanted to just to add to what my colleagues have said, both Sanjeev and Yvonne, is to say that here's the truth. First, there's no traffic. I mean, we just had the presentation before from IATA and also from I believe Rob, saying we are 30%, and we're likely to be at maximum 35%, 38% maybe by the end of the year when it comes to passenger traffic, and we are likely to recover until 2022. So we have no option but to cooperate and collaborate. Otherwise, we will only hemorrhage more if we continue to be to have senseless, competition. I think it's better. There is of course antitrust and competition, so competitive behavior which we need to take care of. But we need to share data more for the benefit of our passengers and see how we can help with the recovery process. There was two things that were mentioned. There was one that they said, I think it was Ayata who said, we're having a problem with the fact that there's a lot of restrictions so far. And secondly, there's also concern when it comes to the fact that not just don't you have restrictions, you also have, you don't have the vaccine. So unless you have those restrictions are lifted and there's a vaccine, recovery is going to be a lot more difficult. But also we have two other issues that I see. One is just incoherence in terms of policy. And I know that the African Union tried very hard to bring a bit of coherence in terms of policy coordination across the African continent. But this policy coherence needs to be not just in Africa, of course, it has to be global, but of course, starting from regional and off, because it is very incoherent from one country to another, and it's very, very difficult for airlines like ourselves to be able to fly people up and down because of these conflicting policies across the region. And so that's where also AFRA needs to help and support us. And then, of course, there's a problem because of the economic downturn that has been brought to bear because of the pandemic. So I think those two things as well, coherence and improving in the economy. So we need to have those things also improve before we can start actually seeing an uptick in traffic. We will do our best to stimulate traffic as well in a coordinated manner, and at the same time see how we can collaborate so that we don't necessarily just hemorrhage by unnecessarily putting excess traffic or excess capacity in routes where we can collaborate and help the African continent move up and down the continent.
Thank you very much for the recommendations given by everybody. Very, very interesting examples, surely solutions for the audience to study in more detail. Let me have the last word as a summary. Leaning on partners, whether through existing contracts and alliances or new agreements, will be highly relevant in the near future. And as I understood, having an aligned and united approach during the recovery phase, thinking out of the box, finding both sides beneficial solutions or collaborative strategies will be key to sustainable traffic development for all airlines. If we still have the time, Maureen, I would like to have, we got two questions in the via the chat function. 3, 4, or even more. Can we answer 2 now, or are we too limited?
Catrin, we can take 2 questions, and the others we can take after. It's just that we are quite behind time, so we can take 2 questions.
Yes. Good. One I have is, do you see the potential for safe corridors within Africa and beyond, offering reliable travel and building confidence among travelers? Is there anything on the horizon? Who likes to answer from the audience?
I think I can answer that.
Thank you,
Yvonne. Definitely, we can have safe corridors within the African continent, but in order to really jumpstart and have a thriving aviation industry, we really need to have harmonized health protocols across the continent, so that both passengers have peace of mind, knowing what to expect when they arrive at a particular country, and feeling safe when they're flying. Otherwise, this disjointed corridor by corridor, this really would be the final solution. So I think it needs to be more of a harmonized approach in terms of putting the right health protocols in place.
Yeah.
Catrin, I just wanted to add one thing to, first of all, completely agree with Yvonne. Completely agree with Yvonne. That's what I was referring to as coherence in terms of policy. But in addition,
Yeah.
I would say also just pragmatism, especially with our ministries of health, because this virus is pragmatic. So you have to be pragmatic as well. And we're learning new things every day. So the longer you take to move forward, it becomes extremely difficult, especially if some countries are doing things slightly differently because there's new information coming through. And so my recommendation is to work through the Africa Union, because they have a program or they have a facility which can facilitate African countries to harmonize, to use Yvonne's words, to harmonize their policies so that we can create these corridors to move back and forth.
Yes, thank you. And the second question I would like to take from the audience is, and maybe Sanjeev, you can jump in here, is how can we ensure honesty in our collaboration efforts while we remain competitors?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I believe as long as you have the right medium, which in this particular case is AFRA, then I really believe that there is a greater need for communication, and good communication during the times of collaboration is a matter of transparency and openness, and to set aside your differences and set aside egos, which are very, very important when you're actually discussing and talking about collaboration. And I'm very happy that AFRA is actually often mediated in such collaborative meetings. They've set up special task forces, which have been very well attended by all the members. And I really believe that you need to have the right mindset and a positive attitude at all times.
Thank you very much. So my big thank you to my panelists. Very interesting session. I'm sure we could give good ideas and recommendations to the audience. And back to you, Maureen.